You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. This episode is brought to you by Benekid Commercial Real Estate. There's more to building wealth in real estate than simply buying and holding. You need to have an entry and exit strategy. You need to know when to invest, have a plan to maximize return during the holding period, and have an exit strategy to sell and exchange the property into a bigger investment. This takes a set of highly qualified professionals to guide you from buying your first investment property to eventually upgrading to the 100-unit complex, providing wealth for you and your family. Brian Benekid and David Peel have over 35 years of combined experience specializing in helping families build wealth through real estate. They assist you in putting your investment on autopilot and will guide you along each exchange. Visit them at www.bcre.co. Again, that's www.bcre.co to give your future a jumpstart. Ideally, renters should not have to pay more than 30% of their annual income on rent. Unfortunately, that idea is not always a reality. To combat that, California Senator Kamala Harris is proposing the Rent Relief Act, which would provide low-income families that are paying more than 30% of their income to rent a tax credit to offset those payments. Today on Highs and Best, we welcome back Eric Meyers of WestPro Realty. We get his thoughts on how the Rent Relief Act might impact the Bay Area housing market and how it might fit in with the upcoming Costa Hawkins vote this November. We also talk Zillow, price gouging, and the CAR tax portability initiative. Okay, perfect. Eric, thanks for coming on to the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this is the second time, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, we've done a lot of business, and we've gotten to know each other over the, what would you say, 10 years maybe?
It's going on 10 years, at least 8 years. Yeah. I know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've known each other for a while. We've done a lot of business together, and so let's get into this. We've got a lot of topics to hit up, short amount of time. So let's jump into the Rent Relief Act. Have you heard about it? What do you think about it? What's your opinion on this?
The Rent Relief Act?
Yeah, this is what's being proposed by Kamala Harris.
Oh, yes. Yes, I did hear about that. I'm surprised we haven't heard more from our realtor trade organizations on this, because we look for legislation that incentivizes home ownership and really gives tax advantages and economic advantages and other incentives to folks to essentially move from being a renter to being a homeowner, because that's the American dream. And although I think this legislation being introduced is well-intentioned to help renters who are struggling with the high cost of rental housing, I'm not sure in the long run it's really the policy we want to have as a state and as a country, where we really want to have the tax breaks really being on the home ownership side as opposed to the rental side. So,
yeah, I was having this debate with someone the other day too, in that it's great in that it would help a lot of people, especially low income. Mm-hmm. Because they would pay a maximum of 30% of their income in rent. Anything above that would be subsidized. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that comes up when you look at prior programs that are very similar to this in other industries is that the person who's collecting that fee, that rental fee, ultimately becomes a winner, because what they're saying could potentially happen, and Forbes did a really good article on this, is that with subsidized rents, the tenants would then be willing to pay a bit more to get into some rental listings. Mm-hmm. Landlords then know some of the rent is subsidized through tax credits, so mm-hmm. they up the pricing, and then the landlords actually make out with higher rents.
Mm-hmm. And we actually see that with subsidized rental programs now, where the rents tend to get pushed a bit higher when the tenants' rents are subsidized. So I could definitely see that happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, like Section 8?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know that's what the whole proposal is right now. Have you heard if there's much support from Congress on this?
I haven't heard anything, and I've looked to our state and national realtor lobbies, and I really haven't heard a policy position yet on it. But I think one will be coming.
Mm-hmm. Now, Sam, maybe you might know this. Is this statewide or nationwide? I thought it was nationwide.
It would be nationwide.
Okay.
But it specifically addresses an issue that Ms. Harris has in her own state.
Yeah.
Is the way I read the press release that came out to all of us. But yeah, it would be a nationwide thing.
Yeah.
Something maybe would be better if it was just a statewide thing, like just for California, not for the rest of the nation.
Well, I think the same arguments would apply, whether it's introduced as a state level legislation or federal level. But that's an interesting question because, real estate markets are local, including rental markets. And to pass a blanket law like that affects the whole country, I mean, I think that's something that has to be looked at and analyzed as well. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all comes down to like an affordability problem, right? I mean, that's really what everyone's worried about, is that rents and even housing prices get too expensive, and then very few people can really afford to live in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
But affordability comes out of a supply and demand issue.
Right.
And then I feel like it keeps going back to this same conversation. It's a supply and demand issue. We literally just need to increase supply.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And increasing supply, although it's simple in principle, and I think we would all agree that would satisfy demand and soften prices both for rental housing and sales, it's a complicated thing to do. And I think as our legislatures and even as constituents, we've backed ourselves into that corner. It's a difficult problem to tackle. I think it's possible to tackle it, but it's got to be done in more than just a 4-year elected term of any one politician. There's got to be a plan of loosening the regulations on construction, particularly when you talk in terms of California, it would be CEQA, relaxing the ability of anonymous lawsuits to stop development. There's also a lot of NIMBYism out there. Folks say, yeah, we need more high-density housing. We need more workforce housing. We need more affordable housing, but it's not going to be in my backyard. Mm-hmm. And so there's got to be a constructive way of approaching the issue where there's a balance and where folks can't show up necessarily at a city council meeting and shoot down a great development proposal, and then you're an elected official on a council or board of supervisors, and you're afraid you're going to lose your seat if you don't adhere to the NIMBYism argument. So, and I think there are people in the industry and their organizations. California Association of Realtors is one of them that have really gotten think tanks together, got the right people together, and really brainstorm ideas for legislation and programs that would really address the housing supply. It's just getting it implemented, and we're successful in getting some laws passed in that regard, but we got a ways to go. But you're absolutely right, and I think we all recognize the problem, but we all disagree on the solution. And I think this is probably segueing into something else we'll talk about, but putting short-term controls on housing, whether it be density controls, construction controls, rent controls, price controls, is not the solution. It's not going to get us where we need to go. We have a shortage of building in California. And if we can provide more rental housing and affordable housing and housing to purchase, and along with that, you got to have the transportation aspect of it to make sure that you've got adequate transportation for the increased housing. So, kind of to answer your question, I totally agree. But we need to get the right people together, talking to the people who make the laws, and really do a comprehensive solve of this issue.
There's a journalist that came out with a great opinion piece where she works for some newspaper in San Francisco. I'm not sure if it's the Chronicle or another one, but she lives in Berkeley. She lives near one of the BART stations that has a big, giant parking lot. She's like, the parking lot's not fully, entirely used all the time, but it's a lot of land space, and we could build up and build many apartments or condos there.
Berkeley BART station?
Possibly, yeah. And it's like a triangle parking lot, right?
Yeah,
Shit.
they've been battling about that one. For
Exactly.
A while, I think.
So why I'm bringing this up is because not in my backyard,
Mhm.
because there's been people that have wanted to develop that, and you can have parking on the first and second floor for BART,
Mhm.
but then also build condominiums or apartments on top. And many people have in that neighborhood have been fighting that, yet they then go around and complain about really high prices in Berkeley.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, you got to pick.
Right.
You can't be contradicting yourself here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we need more supply, and if you're going to battle against adding supply, that defeats the whole purpose.
Right. I think it needs to be. We need to open the minds of our folks in our communities to see the big picture. And the reality is we're a dense state. We're a populous state, and that's because California is a great place to live. The Bay Area is a great place to live. People want to live here. People want to stay here. We don't want people to leave. We like people to have families and have careers and go to school here. But we have to accommodate it, and the only way to do that basically is when you run out of land, you got to start building up. I mean, another solution is, well, with the change in retail, there's less brick and mortar stores. There's less retail buildings, but yet we have a lot of these strip malls still around. I mean, and, you know, for a long time, local jurisdictions have favored that kind of commercial construction for the sales tax revenue. They say, well, we just don't get the revenue out of housing. So we need to find a way that we can develop some of that commercial property into housing, maybe mixed use, but in a way that preserves revenue to the local jurisdiction. So,
well, some cities already have a tax on rent coming in.
they do.
Yeah, Oakland, Berkeley.
Yes.
Yeah, they tax the total gross rent receipts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I mean, I know landlords in cities that don't have a tax may not want to hear it, but that may be a solution for converting commercial spaces to residential housing.
Yeah, and the tax takes many forms. It'd be a gross rents tax. It could be a business license per unit or per square foot. Not that I'm necessarily advocating that, but sometimes, you know, we have to cut off a finger to save a hand. If we need housing and we have a crisis, if we don't get together in the industry and really do some meaningful reform and create more housing, we're just going to be facing more rent controls and worse strangulation of the market, which is bad for everybody.
Yeah, and I tell people, if you look at, so going into rent control, if you look at the cities that have passed rent control many years ago, I mean, we're talking about San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland. These cities have the highest rents. Rents in Richmond are going up on the vacant properties, right? Rent control restricts supply. You have the same or increase in demand. Prices for those vacant properties are going to increase. Now, we have the one reason when a unit vacates, the landlord currently in those cities have the ability to do vacancy decontrol through Costa Hawkins. Now, this is going to be a big battle this year in November,
Right?
because we have this Costa Hawkins Repeal Act on the ballot. What could potentially happen if that goes through?
It's scary. Because I think we lose sight of the fact of why Costa Hawkins was passed in the first place. It was in reaction towards It was in reaction to runaway rent controls and jurisdictions regulating single-family homes, regulating condos, regulating properties that were new construction at the time, and then, as you mentioned, vacancy control at that time, whereas if a unit became vacant, you couldn't raise it to market. You had to keep it at a certain level dictated by the local government. So that's why the voters passed Costa Hawkins, was to address that issue. And so if you repeal Costa Hawkins, what's going to keep that issue from coming right back? And a lot of people have asked me and said, well, are we going to have rent control in all of California if the proposition passes? And I say, well, the folks who support repealing Costa Hawkins, they'd like to see that. They believe in that from a philosophical standpoint. However, it won't be just flipping a switch and having rent control everywhere. However, the jurisdictions that do have rent controls will probably pass more laws strengthening their control over these areas that we've talked about. Some of them have old laws on the books that existed before Costa Hawkins was passed over 20 years ago.
So will those go back into effect?
Those would be called what's the light switch flipping on. They would automatically then become enforceable, and there would be no need to pass a new law in that jurisdiction, adding more controls. So
now, an example of that, I believe Berkeley had rent control even on single-family homes,
correct,
and condos, right?
Yes. And vacancy control was my understanding.
Okay.
Even vacant units were kept depressed, and it decimated the market at the time, particularly for rentals. You know, and in our position in the industry, and I think us in this room agree, and many of us agree, is we understand the problem of affordability. We understand that tenants shouldn't have to be paying 50, 60, sometimes more % of their income towards rent. We believe that's unjust. We believe that's un-American. It's un-Californian. We don't agree with that. However, I mean, we just look at data, and we look at history, and we look at what's worked and what hasn't worked. And virtually every economist, regardless of their political affiliation, whether they're a property owner or not, will tell you that rent controls do not cause rents to come down. You pointed that out at the beginning of this segment. It just doesn't work. And what it does is there's no means testing. It can reward wealthy people while pushing out lower income people. It can gentrify an area. It's not socially just at all. It's got a pretext of bringing social justice and fairness to people who have rental housing, but the effect and the result is it's just not borne out. It's not proven. And so you say, well, why do people still support it? Why do people still want to overturn Costa Hawkins? I think there's a desperation, and I think it becomes more of sort of a philosophical belief and almost a religion, if you will, a belief without facts, just a faith that if we passed this and we allow local government to take control of the rental market, that it's going to solve everybody's problems. And in principle, in a vacuum, in a book, it sounds like it would work, but it's been tried and it's failed. And so we need to stop doing things that fail, and we need to do things that work.
Yeah, I mean, I think Richmond was the first city in 27 years that even passed rent control.
Yes.
And then after that, you now have it in so many different cities being proposed, or a few cities being passed. Sacramento, it's going to be on the ballot this November, so it's going to be interesting to see how that all works out. Now, I do want to talk about something else that's come up pretty recently, where you and I even had to help out some clients on this, but the state of emergency price gouging. Okay, and a lot of people are still not aware of this, but when there's a state of emergency in place with that the governor puts into place, price gouging kicks in for many different industries, including the real estate industry, especially when they're identifying the various targeted areas. So, for example, Governor Brown just, I think it was in April, where he extended it for Napa, Solano, Sonoma. I want to say there were a total of 5 or 6 counties.
I think there were 5 counties, yeah. There were a couple more up north.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now I assume with the fires going on, that's also going to be extended again for, even more counties up north.
Yes. That could be likely, yes. It remains to be seen, but right now it's in effect till December for those 5 counties.
So basically what this says is you cannot raise rents by more than 10%. That's in any 12 months, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. But there's kind of a lot of misunderstanding going around. You're referring to an actual law that's in the penal code, the California Penal Code, about anti-price gouging. You can't increase the cost of certain things more than 10% in areas where there's been declared a natural disaster. In this case, the fires. And so that's been extended to also include, as you point out, rental housing. So the question, that's one question you get, was it 10% per year? Because as we know, under current state law, you can raise rents 10% per year with a 30-day notice, given properly, provided there's no rent controls in the jurisdiction that you're sending the rent raise. So I think in general that's probably a good interpretation. But I've had people say, well, what if I'm not in one of those 5 counties? What if my property's not one of the 5 counties? Am I still covered by anti-price gouging? Am I still limited to 10%? To be on the safe side, I say yes. The Attorney General in California has alluded to the fact that, well, just because a disaster occurs in one county, it can drive people to the next county because they can't live there anymore because it's had a fire, and so you can gouge prices, say here in Contra Costa County. So I've advised people, well, if you want to be on the safe side, and they say, well, do you have any legal precedent? Do you have any case law? Do you have any clarification from the government, whether it applies or not? And I have to say no, but you can be the test case. And that usually people will go back and raise it 10% because we know how expensive it can be to be the test case. We're talking, rounds of appeals and court cases and all of that goes along with it. So I'd hate to see it be an issue that has to be litigated, but it might go that way, especially if we keep having these natural disasters. I think nobody foresaw that we would keep continuing to have these fires, and the governor would keep extending these state of emergencies for 6 months, and then it becomes a year and even longer. So now it's an issue. Yeah. And we are looking for clarity. But I tell people, if you want to, it's really a personal decision. If you want to be on the safe side, I'd do the 10% for now.
Now, the client that we helped, it was a very unique situation in that they purchased a property that had rent increases above 10% that hadn't kicked in yet. So this is one thing that it's very interesting. So for people out there that are in the process or going to buy a multifamily or actually any investment property, many sellers will issue a rent increase and then sell the property or put the property on the market, basically saying, "Oh, look, the rents are going to kick in from $1,200 to $1,400, right?"
Right.
And it's a marketing tactic to basically show, "Hey, look, my building can be worth more," right? And so many times these buyers are buying the building based on that $1,400 value instead of the $1,200 value. And they're not aware that that was an illegal rent increase
or potentially illegal.
Potentially.
Yeah. Which means the buyers potentially purchased a lawsuit in that case. Yeah. And I think you're getting to the point as well. I didn't give the rent raise. I bought the property. Well, if you seek to enforce the prior rent raise, you're basically taking ownership of that rent raise. So, that's something to be very careful. And so the follow-up question might be, well, what if the rent raise took effect before we closed escrow? Same thing, because the tenant can come back at any time and say, well, you gave me an illegal rent raise. I'm going to dial it back. You owe me a refund. And they can sue the old owner for a refund if they paid the raise prior to sale, and they can come after you as the new owner, or at least have a defense to an eviction, or even come after you for wrongful termination or wrongful eviction if you seek to enforce it. So, we always wish the law were clear, particularly in landlord-tenant law, and it never really is. Yeah. And there's always one issue, one challenge that we have always tends to create another, and then we're talking about it and we're trying to figure out. But I really, you and I are both CAR directors at the state level for the Realtor Association. We should really, after this, reach out to folks there and have that certain committee look at this issue. And maybe we can either support or draft some clarifying legislation to guide people. That may be a way we can look at that, because maybe lawmakers aren't aware of it. And rather than leave it to the overburdened courts to try to figure out how this this statute applies, when maybe nobody really predicted this is how it would be applied, maybe we can pass some cleanup legislation that would really bring clarity. Yeah. I mean, and just as an aside, there's another area we've been trying to do this for a while, and that's service animals. I know we're not going to get into that this morning, but that's another area where we want to follow the law. We want to respect people's rights to have support animals, but what does that really mean? What is the law? What can and can't we do? What rights and do people have?
There was a bill for that last year that failed. Now I believe that decision is going to be with the Fair Employment and Housing.
Yeah. It's been kicked down to an administrative level with the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, but we've yet to receive. There's been hearings, and industry stakeholders have been able to participate in those hearings and information gathering, but there's never, to this point, not yet been some clear guidelines to come out. Even if an administrative guideline comes out, it's still subject to court challenge. It still could wind up in the courts. I mean, a legislative way to go is, especially if it's clean and it's clear and it's well conceived and it's supported by both sides and it's bipartisan or what have you is probably the best way to go with these types of issues.
So the biggest tip that people can take away right now would be, if you're in the process of purchasing an investment property, get the lease agreements, get the rent increase copies, talk to an attorney, preferably Eric Meyers, and
Thank you.
pay for 1 or 2 hour consultation.
Yeah.
It's worth it,
Yeah.
and it could save you literally a lawsuit down the road.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure everything's dialed in correctly.
Well, and some of the forms we use in the business, one of them is called a tenant estoppel statement that we routinely get from residential tenants. We ask the seller to provide to the buyer before close of escrow. And that essentially has some waiver and release language. It may or may not be strong enough to cover this issue we're talking about, but certainly go to your attorney, go to your broker, who will go to the in-house counsel if you're in the business, or go to your realtor and get a form, because if it's a case where someone's been raised more than 10%, but they're fine with it, have them sign a piece of paper that says, I've been raised in 10%, I'm fine with it, I'm not going to challenge it. Some kind of language like that where everybody's understanding and everybody's on the same page before you close escrow.
Mm-hmm. I get a lot of leads from Yelp, and many of these leads tend to be people who just recently purchased duplex, triplex, fourplex. It's amazing to me how many people will buy an investment property and not get tenant estoppels.
Yeah, it floors me. Yeah. It's become an industry standard. If you use the standard zip form that we use that's owned by the California Association of Realtors, there's actually a boilerplate clause in the investment property purchase agreement that requires the seller to provide the tenant estoppel statements. It's just good practice. So, both as an investor and as somebody who's representing investors, you really want to be aware of that, because there's things you don't anticipate. Things like this penal code section come up in the state of emergency and the 10% cap and the anti-price gouging. You'll wish in retrospect you had those forms and had those releases and understanding in writing between the parties.
Yeah. Now, in addition to being an attorney, you also do property management.
Right.
And have you heard of Zillow's latest announcement? I believe they announced it last week, maybe the week before. But Zillow is they're going to develop their website to allow people, like tenant prospects, to submit applications online and then also pay rent online directly to the landlord. So wanted to get your opinion on this and see if I know there's a lot of hate against Zillow by people in the real estate industry, because Zillow continues to make moves, and everyone's worried if a company this size will eventually try to eliminate loan officers and agents. And speaking of loan officers, Zillow just recently got in contract, I believe, to acquire a mortgage company. So what's your opinion on Zillow?
Well, my opinion is they're quite a company, and I'm not a hater, and I feel like if they do something, they do it well, and they fill a space, and there's a need for it, and the consumer wants it, then that's really what our country's about. That's how we have innovation. That's how we have a free market, and that's how we have entrepreneurship. Having said that, being in property management, it concerns me. When there's going to be another platform that I don't have control of, that potentially, and what has happened in the past with Zillow is we can resist it all we want, but if our consumers start wanting to do it that way through their platform or their application, we sort of have to bend to the tide or go with the flow, and usually that means paying for that service too. So it's concerning, but I think the reaction shouldn't be, well, they shouldn't be doing that, or, oh, that's terrible. It should be, well, what are they doing? Are they filling a space? Is that something that we should be doing in the industry, or we should have a competitive model, or we should be doing better? And I think that's healthy. That's a healthy way to look at it. And if they do something really well, there's been cases now in our industry, particularly other areas of real estate like MLS, where we're essentially in contract to share data and quote unquote partner with Zillow, if you will, because as much as we may not like it, there's companies that'll come and they'll do things that are innovative. And like I said, if our consumers demand that and they expect it, then we're going to have to work with them and deliver it. So it's scary on one hand, but I think you need to get over the fear that there's always going to be change, whether it's from Zillow or someone else. There's going to be a new way of doing business.
Yeah.
And I think it's really our responsibility to be aware that these things are happening, to look into them. Sometimes the latest and greatest thing that comes out is not going to work. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we're surprised. Most of the time we're not. But be aware of it and work it into your business model. Maybe it was something that can work for you as a property manager. Don't automatically say, oh, well, Zillow's getting into my business. Well, see how they're getting into your business. See if it's something that you can do yourself or work into how you do things. And, I don't think large companies like that are inherently evil or want to destroy people. They just want to compete in the marketplace. And that's what a capital economy and a free market is all about.
Yeah. My opinion, I don't think they're going to really be able to crack much into it because, if you really look at management companies, every management company is going to have some type of management software that also allows online payments at this day and age, right?
Right.
So for a management company to switch to Zillow online payments, I can't see that happening if their software already provides a one-stop portal for the tenant to make their payments, right? So I'm curious to see who would actually use this service. Maybe the applications, because if Zillow partnered up with a third-party company that would run background checks, criminal, that makes it very convenient and easy for a lot of property owners because many individual property owners that self-manage don't know where to go for processing credit reports, background checks, criminal checks, eviction checks. And if Zillow actually made a portal for landlords to do that, I could totally see the benefit there. The pay rent online, I just can't see it.
Well, unless I think maybe the mom and pop, like the ones folks who don't have a property manager, maybe have one or two rentals that they manage on their own, and the convenience of having, ordinarily, I know a couple of folks like that around our area, and they'll give the tenant maybe their bank account number or something. They'll go to direct deposit it. So it's a way that you can kind of compete with the property managers and the larger property owners who have this software you're talking about and offer that online payment option. But I think, even if Zillow cornered that with the small independent owners, I think the way we address that is the same thing we did when Zillow got the MLS data and started and disseminates it basically directly to the consumer. We realized that we weren't, as real estate professionals, we weren't the source of up-to-minute real estate data anymore. So what we did is we focused on the other things that we provide that a vendor like Zillow is not in the business of providing as realtors. Our negotiation skills, our marketing skills, our adherence to the laws and providing forms and covering our clients, that kind of thing. So when you look at property management, we're more than just collecting online payments and applications and advertising. We manage property. Managing property is a whole different thing. You cannot manage property. Software in and of itself, at least in this day and age, who knows what the future brings, but I'll say today, I don't think there's a software party out there that can manage property. It takes a real estate professional or a property owner with real estate knowledge to manage property. There's just so many moving parts, and there's so many things that go into your responsibility of owning property that I don't think I would feel threatened by Zillow offering some of these, these functions to what I think essentially would be the smaller property owners, maybe smaller property management firms.
So it's funny you say that because I'm an advisor for a tech company that does property management software, and they asked me straight up, what percentage of the overall management, like all the work you have to do in property management, what percentage do you think makes the software itself makes up, right? I said 30%. The other 70% is completely outside of the software that, the softwares today just simply can't handle. I think with AI bots, more and more is starting to come out. There's Google Duplex that was very impressive, that can make calls. that I think with AI bots and the new technology coming out, you'll be able to maybe push that 30% to 40, 50%. But at the end of the day, you're still managing physical assets.
That's right.
There's a lot of physical labor and work that has to go into inspecting the units, and then you're dealing with government agencies,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I mean, and the government's not going to want to deal with your AI bot. They're going to want to deal with the property manager or owner, at least at this point in time. So
If it's Google Duplex, they may not even know it's a bot.
yeah. Oh, well, that now we're talking about Google.
Yeah.
We started out with Zillow, so maybe I'll be a little more worried about Google. But who knows what the future brings? But it's our destiny to have innovation in any field we're in. And if we do what we do we need to keep ourselves relevant. We need to embrace change. If it's for the better, if change is not for the better, we need to advocate for change that is in the best interest for everybody. Because at the end of the day, it's the people that matter. The people that live in these houses and rent these houses and own these homes that matter. And that's who we serve. So all this other stuff is just stuff. They're tools that we use to serve people. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah. So California Association of Realtors has a tax portability initiative that's going to be on the ballot. We've talked about it before on the podcast in recent highest and best episodes, but I wanted you to kind of break this down. What is this tax portability initiative going to do, and should people vote in favor of it? And the answer is yes, in November.
Yes. Yes. Great question. I just talked about it this morning at a large real estate office, and it can be a confusing issue, so I'll try to make it simple for folks who are following the podcast. But basically, it allows folks 55 years and older, if this initiative passed, that they could sell their house anywhere in California and then buy a house anywhere in California, owner-occupied, and be able to transfer their tax basis, their property tax basis. So the way it is now, in most cases, there are some exceptions, but they're limited. If a person, 55 years of age or older, sells a home and then buys a new home, that new home is reassessed typically at the purchase price. So if they had been in their prior home for many decades, which is often the case, their property taxes could go up to a point that it really prevents them from selling and moving. So you have people staying in houses that really aren't appropriate for them, in areas they don't want to be in anymore. They may be retired, they need to move. And really it doesn't, and the result of that is you're not freeing up inventory for first-time home buyers and people who are stepping up from renting to buying. So the real benefit here is not that it is going to save people money on taxes, but it's also going to make the government taxes too, because when the first-time home buyers buy those homes that the 55-year and older people sell, those bases get bumped up under Prop 13. And that's a part of the dynamic analysis that's missing in the Legislative Analyst Office report on this initiative. And we're pushing hard to get this proposition passed, but there is a lot of opposition because of that LAO report that says, well, the local jurisdictions, the firefighters, the police, the teachers are going to lose money. And
now,
it's going to hurt communities.
In that report, didn't they clarify, though, that the loss of revenue would only be year one, and I believe after that it would be neutral, potentially positive?
In the LAO report?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that. I think the initial report and the analysis of the proposition as it stands, the one that's going in the November ballot, is showing huge multi-million-dollar losses. That's the analysis. But there are other legislative options that CAR is putting forward, and there's another proposition that's being put on the 2020 ballot that we recently heard about, that an LAO report in that respect would show more favorable numbers. And we can get into the weeds, probably not on that.
Yeah.
Probably suffice it to say today to vote yes. I believe it's Prop 5, right? Or is it Prop 10? I think Prop 10 is the Costa Hawkins Prop 5. But anyway, it's the portability tax, property tax fairness initiative. We need to vote yes on that.
So right now, out of I want to say there's 52 counties in California, but only 11 currently participate in Prop 90. And so this essentially mixes Prop 60, 90, and adds the ability that you can even buy up, correct? And if you buy up, so it may not be a total loss in tax revenue, because if someone decides to buy up, well, they're also going to then be assessed those additional taxes above their tax basis. Correct?
Yeah, and that's part of the analysis that's missing in the LAO report, and also, as I mentioned, the actual buying of those relinquished properties by largely first-time home buyers or people stepping up, families and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be a complicated issue, but I think it kind of gets to be complicated because of that report and that analysis that is, again, it's a static analysis and not a dynamic analysis. I hope the public would trust that realtors would never put anything forward that's going to bankrupt our local communities and hurt our schools, hurt our police, and hurt our fire, because ultimately that hurts everybody and hurts real estate. So we would never support an initiative that does that. This is about freeing up inventory. This is about bringing new people into the market to buy homes. This is for allowing our older generation to move without being, forced to pay 4 and 5 times the amount of property taxes they pay.
Especially on retirement.
Yeah, it's you talk about social justice. This is a social justice issue. This is a housing issue. This is treating a segment of our society fairly. And right now, Prop 90, yes, 11 counties do reciprocate, but you're right, it's only once in a lifetime, and you can only step down. It's very restrictive, and it is only 11 counties. So why not just open it up and give people that freedom and really look at an analysis that's truthful going forward? And let's face it, too, if a law got passed and it really was hurting the communities, we can pass another law and undo it. Everybody's going to say, look, we can't bankrupt our schools, our police, and our fire. And it's really, as realtors, it's regrettable that the public would have that kind of perception of us. So we really do need to get the word out that this is actually good for everybody. And it's good for those very people. I mean, sometimes there's no inventory for teachers, police, and fire to buy in the communities they work in. This would free up housing inventory for them to be able to buy closer to where they work as well.
And I believe out of the 11 counties that participate in Prop 90 right now, I don't think there's one that's really come out and said that they've experienced loss in revenue with people from other counties coming in, because that's one of the worries.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, there are other better analyses that can be done. But, that LAO report, it's what gets published. It's official.
Once it's official.
Yeah, and voters, we vote on a lot of things. You get your voting packet, and you don't, not everybody has time to read the fine print or do research on an issue. There's just so many issues that come forward. So you read the summary, and you see that, and you're like, no, I'm going to vote no on that. So I think we recognize that as realtors, and that's why there is an initiative that's going to be qualified for the 2020 ballot in November. And it has all of the goodies of this initiative, but it also has some certain carve-outs and limitations that were previously allowed under Prop 13 for mainly investor and commercial properties, closing some loopholes, if you will. And so when the LAO looks at that and does the analysis, they should come up in positive territory. And so we're confident that even if we are not successful with the initiative this November, we would be successful 2 years from now.
Okay. So if people want to contact you, Eric, what's the best way to contact you?
My cell phone, 510-233-5000. Call
Easy.
or text. Leave me a voicemail. Or my email is westprorealty@gmail.com. You can Google me, Eric Meyers, EricMeyers, real estate lawyer, Pinole, and you can find my contact information.
Perfect. And I truly think, over the years, I've seen how you work different cases and how you give advice, and I have to say you're the best attorney right now in Northern California, hands down.
Wow.
So
Thank you.
just everything's dialed in, your prices are great. I truly think you're the best right now. And so keep up the good work, and I really think anyone who's looking to purchase a property, especially an investment property, or even a property they want to move into that may already have a tenant in place, needs to contact you to get advice during that inspection period so that they know the potential issues they may run into once they close and become the new owner.
That's great advice. It's so much better. You always want to talk to an attorney up front before the deal's done and before the lawsuit is filed. And in fact, our forms say that, and our buyers and sellers sign them. Yeah, but if you in this case, you would probably recommend me to your clients. But if your listeners have an attorney they work with in real estate law, you can recommend the name too. It goes a little further if you say, here, you're signing this here, recommends you get legal advice. By the way, if you want legal advice, here's a person that I know who can give you some good advice. They can give you a consultation if you'd like to have any of these questions answered.
Yeah, great. So again, thank you for being on the podcast. We covered a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of really good information.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Good luck in your business, and
thank you.
We'll do this again sometime soon.
All right.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubin. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.